Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Now today we're going to take a closer look at the GTX 580 SO. This uses pretty much the same PCB as the SoC cards from Gigabyte. This card specifically is a revision 1.0, which means that this one has a design problem that's potentially a pretty big deal breaker, but the revision 2.0 and 3.0 version of this card are much better and much more capable for overclocking. I'm also going to go a bit into the heatsink because the design is kind of interesting, which is why it's still on there. And yeah, so first I've got to remove the heatsink, and you can, if you know your way around PCBs, you might already see something on it that's interesting. And yeah, makes the card look very interesting for overclocking. And I mean, this card is more or less meant for overclocking. Oh, and this heatsink really doesn't want to come off. There we go. Yeah, you really need a lot of force because those thermal pads, they do hold on really tight. But here we go. Thermal paste spread is okay-ish, could be better, but it covers the entire die at least. This heatsink obviously doesn't work without the IHS, which is kind of a bummer, but that's usually the norm. And let's also take off the separate VRM heatsink. Because yeah, the Mosfets on this card are interesting. So let's take that off. There we go. And here we have the bare PCB. Now, let's take a reference GTX 580. And I got the camera out a bit more. Yeah, so you can pretty much instantly see a big difference, but also, like, the left side of the PCB is pretty much untouched. Except for some minor parts, but the right side of the PCB, the VRM is very obviously custom. So on the reference card over here, you get a 6-phase V-core, 2-phase memory, and then yeah, on the back you just have some filtering and the PWM controllers. And for this card, you have your V-core VRM taking up pretty much the entire middle section of the PCB, front and back. And then your 2-phase memory is sort of here on the end of the PCB. And you do have a BIOS switch over here, which is more like just a button than a switch. But yeah, this is what switches between these two BIOS chips, because, well, there's no other button on the card. And you can see here, there's no second BIOS chip on the reference card, even though there is technically the solder point for it. Well, actually, this card also has the solder point. Maybe this isn't meant for BIOS chip and some other circuitry, like this right here on a GTX 480 would be the PEX rail, whereas on the 580 it is over here. Could be something like that. But yeah, this card has dual BIOS, and that's your BIOS switch, which is interesting because you can't access it with the stock heatsink installed. So yeah, you can pretty much only access it when the card is like for benchmarking, and like, yeah, not running the stock heatsink. And yeah, so the V-core VRM obviously is a lot bigger, well, not from space, but just from inductor count. So you do have a 12-phase V-core VRM over here. It is doubled. Actually, where's the doubler chip? Right down the front. So we have 3 doubler chips, which is a bit interesting, because either these are 2 doublers in one chip, or they are actually quadruplers, and we just have 3 PWM signals going into the card. But then again, your V-core PWM controller over here is an ADP 4100, and that's a 6-phase controller. So it wouldn't really make sense to use a 6-phase controller and then only use 3 phases of it to quadruple them into 12. So that's why I'm saying these are probably just 2 doublers in one package. And we have a doubled 6-phase into a 12-phase. Now your memory VRM is a 2-phase, there's no doubling chips anywhere here. But the PWM controller is interesting because your PWM controller for the memory is an NCP5395. That's a 4-phase controller if I remember correctly, but you only have 2-phase memory. Now if there was a doubler for memory, this could potentially do both core and memory because 3 signals go into quadruplers over here and then 1 signal gets doubled here, but there's no doubler here, and what is the ADP4100 on the back doing if this does core and memory? So yeah. I don't exactly know why they chose such a... Well, yeah, this is more expensive than the usual controller you would use. But I think it might be because there is a software tool for this card that lets you adjust core and memory voltage in software. And the normal 2-phase controller you would get for memory on a GTX 580 might not be capable of being controlled in software. So they chose a more complex controller for memory, so you can control memory voltage in software. That could totally be the reason why. But I don't actually know enough about the control mechanism that you have like in software talking to the hardware, like how that all works to like really verify that. But I have a suspicion they use this controller to get software voltage control over the memory rail with the GTX 580 SO tool. Yeah, and let's get into the part that on this revision 1.0 board is pretty lackluster. Now, so for our 12 phases, we have 1 MOSFET on the back, and then per phase we have 2 MOSFETs. Did I say back? I said 1 MOSFET on the front and 2 MOSFETs per phase on the back. So that's interesting because only 1/3 of the VRM is getting cooled. And I can't even say if this is the high side or one of the low sides, because Gigabyte chose to exclusively only use on semiconductor NTMFS 4921Ns in this VRM. The 4921N is typically used as a high side MOSFET on a reference 580. Pretty sure if... you can't really see it on this one. Yeah, it's a bit too hard to see. But yeah, this does have 4921Ns as the high sides. Now it's using 4935Ns. Is it? Yeah, it's using 4935Ns as low sides, which the 580 SO isn't. So all the 3 MOSFETs in each phase on this card are 4921Ns. Now, that's not usually a good idea to do, because a MOSFET that's typically used as a high side is fast, like it can switch on and off very fast, but it doesn't really have, it has like a lot of RDS on, which you don't want on a low side, and it also can't handle that much current. So yeah, using these typically high side MOSFETs as your low sides is gonna severely limit your current capability, and it will also make your VRM run a lot hotter than it has to. Which thankfully they fixed on the revision 2.0 and 3.0, where they switched over to using much more capable MOSFETs. I don't know which ones exactly, but they are the same or very close to the ones you have on the 580 Direct CO2. They are not these. So yeah, the datasheet for the 4921N lists at I think 25 degrees ambient, which it's a bit hotter than what is my test bench setup. It lists a continuous drain current of 8.8 amps for one of these 4921Ns, with 24 of them used as low sides. If my math is correctly, that makes slightly over 210 amps of maximum current capability. That's not a lot. I would think that's actually less than a reference card. Yeah, and that's why the revision 1.0 of this card is very, very not good in my opinion. Now, I have benched the card. I actually don't know. I haven't touched 1.3 volts VCore yet. But I think when I do, it will actually not explode, but it will be very uncomfortably hot. And yeah, like this VRM is just not efficient because of all that extra RDS-on you have in your low sides. And also that only one of these Mosfets is actually getting actively cooled. The backside just kind of exists. I always point a fan at it in my test bench, but well, yeah, there's like no heatsink. Means the smallest amount of surface area you can have, and yeah, I presume that one of these MOSFETs on the back is the high side, and then you have one low side on each side, because that would make the most sense for thermals. But since they're all the same part, I can't really say which, and I would have to measure, which I haven't done. Now, where it gets even a bit more interesting also is the MOSFETs they chose for the memory VRAM. Now we have two 4921 ends on the back here, and then per phase, two 4935 ends on the front. So for the memory VRM, they actually used proper low side MOSFETs. The question is, if you use those MOSFETs in your memory, why not use them in the core as well? Like, did Gigabyte just buy a bunch of high sides that they had no low sides to complement for? I don't know. The revision 1.0 is, I'm being told it is very, very rare. Like, I'm being told that this revision 1.0 is, well, it's probably not the rarest 580, but like, Gigabyte cards, like Gigabyte custom Fermi cards are... Well, there was a 460 that I sent to a friend, but like, this is the only GF110 Gigabyte card that I've ever seen in Germany, I think. And I'm being told, even for these Gigabyte cards, the revision 1.0 of the SO is stupidly rare, so... I guess I can call myself lucky for having this, but I can't really say that I like the VRM. Only, and exclusively only, because of the low-side MOSFETs. It will probably not blow up, but it's gonna be a lot closer to blowing up than pretty much any other card, I think. Now, let's talk about something that's genuinely great about the VRM, and that's this. We have 5 Prodlyzer capacitors here. So these Prodlyzer capacitors are basically like a very big capacitor that has some of the best noise filtering characteristics that you can get. The downsides to these is they have a very bad lifespan rating, so I think the maximum you can get them in is 1000 hours rated. And they are the most effective if you place them directly behind the GPU core, which Gigabyte hasn't done here. Asus has actually done that with on the Direct CO2, where they've placed one of these directly behind the core. But MSI on the Lightning and also Gigabyte on this card chose to use not one but multiple Prodlyzers as the VRM output filter and not directly behind the core. Now that still helps a lot. Prodlyzers are really, really good for output filtering, like pretty much across the frequency spectrum. Like usually you would have multilayer ceramics and SMD polymers and then CAN types to filter different frequencies. But these Prodlyzers, as far as I know, are pretty much good for everything. And yeah, so if these are still good, there's a good chance that these were cooked. And like, because they have this bad lifespan, there's a good chance that these might not do anything, but the card was in mostly good condition. It seems like the person I got this from did care for the card, so I'm hoping that these Prodlyzers still do something. Because yeah, that's gonna be a very, very good output filter, especially because the front, like you have the bunch of 560 microfarad caps, like, I mean, it's better than nothing, but like that's not a lot. I would have liked to see maybe some SMD polymers in this empty section right here, or maybe some multilayer ceramics. But obviously if you have these and if they're working, you pretty much don't need anything else. So yeah, as far as actually running the card goes, I have run the card already, but yeah, it doesn't really run that well. The core doesn't seem to be that great, and the memory is pretty awful. So the memory on this card is 1 gigabit Hynix AFR. This is the third card where I tried properly like overclocking and overvolting this memory chip. And yeah, so the first card where I tried to overvolt this, it literally just black screened and refused to boot at over 1.65 volts. The second card where I overvolted this memory chip, it actually scaled well, like it scaled quite well, and it actually achieved pretty decent clocks. I don't know why there's such a big difference in how this memory chip behaves. Like, it's 1 gigabit AFR. I am not aware of any more distinctions between these memory chips. And then here again we have the same memory chip, but yeah, it black screens at over 1.65 volts. So this is the kind that doesn't scale. Which, yeah, that's not good. It is the highest clocking AFR out of the box that I have. It does 2400. But if you have something like Samsung E-Die or even Samsung G-Die out of the box, it's gonna be doing 2500 plus. And E-Die, if it's cold enough, will even do 2600 pretty easily. So this at 2400 and no way to go higher because it doesn't have any voltage scaling, which the Samsung chips do. Yeah, this is not gonna be that great. Now on Fermi, your memory clock doesn't really amount to a lot of score, at least in Firestrike, which is why having bad memory doesn't really have to be a super big deal breaker. Like, you're probably not gonna do world records with a card that has this memory, but it shouldn't be a total deal breaker. You can still run the card with this memory and get decent scores, just because on Fermi your core clocks have so much more impact on the score. It's just that this core also doesn't seem to be that great. With that said, I have only run the card on the stock heatsink, which I guess we can get to now. This heatsink on paper is pretty good and it performs decently, but it's also not the best. Now, the heatsink is divided in two sections. Now, around the core and the memory, you have this vapor chamber, which is pretty much the same size you have on a reference blower card. But instead of it just having a blower fin stack on top of it, it has this open fin stack on it with these two fans. And then you have two heat pipes, which look like at least 10mm or 8, I'm not sure. But these heat pipes go out into the separate fin stack, which has the third fan on it. That's sideways, oriented to this fin stack, and this blows through to the VRM heatsink on the PCB and also out the side. So in terms of airflow, this heatsink isn't all that bad. It also is very silent. Like at 100% fan speed, this is not loud. Like, this is one of the most silent 580s, if not the most silent 580. Like, yeah. But then the maximum capability of the heatsink is not all that great. It maxed at over 70 degrees, which is worse than a blower. I think the blower heatsinks for benching are actually quite decent just because they have a lot of mass, which I thought was because of the vapor chamber, but since this one also has a vapor chamber, I don't know. The blower heatsinks just, like, I just always max the fan at 100%. They are very, very loud at that point, but they are performing quite well, actually. So this heatsink, on paper it looks pretty cool, but it doesn't really perform all that well. For benching, at least. I think if you were running one of these cards back in the day, it would be pretty good. But yeah, it just doesn't have that much of cooling capability. And yeah, so there's one more thing about the card, which is interesting, but also a bit annoying to deal with, which they are these voltage read points. Nowhere does it say that these are voltage read points, and it doesn't even say what you can read. But these very obviously should be voltage read points because you have these little fuses right here, and you have this ground spot on the left, and yeah, these are gonna be voltage read points, like you have them, for example, on the 580 Lightning. So yeah, I don't know what they are for, but like one's gonna be core, another one's gonna be memory, the third could be PAX, and then the fourth I actually don't know. Maybe 5 volts, maybe 1.8 volts, I don't know. I would have to stab the card while it's running, and since I've only run it with the stock heatsink for now, I can't access them while the card is running. So, yeah. So, yeah, we've already crossed 20 minutes, so I think we should come to the end of the video. So, the GTX 580 SO revision 1.0 from Gigabyte. It has a pretty major flaw in its V-Core low-side Mosfets. I do not like what they've done. If this was a revision 2.0 or 3.0, I would probably have a much better opinion of this card, because that one actually has a V-Core VRM that is genuinely very, very great, and it's gonna run everything, whereas this VRM, I'm always going to be, every time I run this card, I'm going to be worried that from 1 second to the next, this will blow up. Which, yeah, that's not a great feeling to have while you're benching something. Yeah, so the PCB, ignoring the Mosfets, is pretty nice. Like, I really like the design of this, I just don't like the component choice. I was thinking about swapping out the Mosfets manually, like buying Mosfets and then swapping all of those sides out by myself. I've swapped Mosfets before, so that wouldn't be that hard to pull off. I was just urged by people to not do this because this card is such a rare card. So, and because it's probably not going to blow up anyway. It's probably going to be fine, it's just going to run hot and be less efficient than it could be. So for now I've decided to leave the VRM alone, as long as it doesn't blow up. If it blows up, well, then I guess I'm gonna be swapping Mosfets anyway. Yeah, so I don't know if I'm going to run this more. I will probably delete the core and run it on water for a bit, and push up the voltage a bit. Like, this is... It has the software voltage control tool, which makes it very convenient to overclock. You don't need to volt mod anything. Like, you just start the tool, which I can't give you a link if you want it, sadly, but it's called 580 SO, and you will probably find it somewhere on overclock.net or similar websites. Yeah, like, this should be pretty much a walk in the park to overclock. It's just that, like, I got a bit unlucky with my memory chips, and also that I got the still, I've been told, very rare but not that capable revision 1.0 of this card. But yeah, I think I'm going to run it some more, try out water, and yeah, if something interesting happens, you'll see the card again. If not, I don't know. Maybe it's just going to be a collections piece like my 7970 Lightning, which I'm not running because of a different thing, because that card is with one leg in the grave already. But yeah, so interesting card. If it wouldn't be a revision 1.0, I would probably give it a very, very good review. In the revision 1.0, it's probably more a collector's piece than a card to competitively bench. My 580 Direct CO2 is probably just going to blow this out of the water, because it does have a very good VRM, and it has Samsung E-Die plus a very good core. Like, yeah, I think the Direct CO2, my Direct CO2 specifically, is just better than this, because, yep, I got memory chips that are not that great. The core is pretty meh, and then I have the VRM situation to deal with. But yeah, I think I've repeated myself enough times now. So thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and until next time, goodbye.